Again, welcome to the Wholesome Wave National Nutrition Incentive Network webinar, Fundraising for Incentive Programs. So here are presenters for the event. Again, I'm Ava. We've got Sharon Hametz, who's our Senior Development Manager. Elizabeth Atwell is our Program Associate on the NIN team. And then we have Julia Pon, who's our NIN Program Director, is also going to be joining us. And we have another NIN Program Manager running our questions with support staff, Lauren Lindstrom. We're very excited to have her. So this webinar is going to provide our National Nutrition Incentive Network members with an overview of funding for incentive programs with a strong focus on applying for federal grants. This webinar will be available for future reference as a training for other staff or volunteers. You can always forward the recording along to them once you've received the link, or they can register with the original registration link. So before we start and get going on the training, we'd just like to give you an introduction and overview to the National Nutrition Incentive Network, of which you are now a part. Many of you may have seen this information before, but it's useful to just go over it. In 2014, the incentive programs we partnered with reached over 50,000 consumers, 5,600 farmers, and leveraged $3.3 million in incentives and federal benefits. In 2015, we're working in 32 states, working with 79 network members that represent approximately 588 direct-to-consumer markets, including farmers markets, CSAs, and mobile markets. We are extremely proud and excited to bring together this inspiring group of practitioners to be able to work with you all and to help increase capacity within our network to reach even more consumers and farmers in the future. So as you can see here, these numbers do show a steady increase in the number of incentive programs, sites, and consumers and farmers served by these programs since Wholesome Wave started its operations in 2008. With this rapid expansion, we have recognized a need to build the capacity of incentive program operators as they move from their very beginning stage one of starting programs through growing their programs to serve more customers in what we call stage two, and then these higher capacity programs linking together and expanding into statewide networks in stage three, and finally, once fully formed regional and statewide networks look to start engaging in innovation, research, and advocacy to make the case for incentive programs with policymakers at the national level. We move these programs along various stages with some of our network services shown here. First, tools and technical assistance, such as this webinar and other web-based trainings, toolkits, and in-person direct assistance. We also gather data about incentive programs at the national level, and we make this information available for educational and advocacy purposes. And finally, we've developed and are continuing to expand upon our resources for incentive programs to engage with each other in a community of practice via listserv, newsletter, resource library, and our annual conference coming up in January 2016 in Atlanta, Georgia. You will continue to hear more details about these resources from us through the listserv and the newsletter in the coming weeks and months, and we do always hope you'll take full advantage of them. And if you ever have any questions about how to get more involved in the network, you can always contact us at Wholesome Wave or contact your program manager to find out more. In the recent announcement of federal grants awarded for farmers markets and incentive programs, we did some running of numbers because we wanted to find out how many of our network members were receiving these funds and how much of it they were receiving. And we found that $12.6 million was awarded to NIN members across the country. And if you include the match that those network members provided for those grants, they leveraged about $21.5 million in funds to support incentive programs. So first and foremost, we want to congratulate our members on this amazing success. This is a huge validation of the work happening within this community of practice, and we're so proud and so excited for all of our network members. And we want to make sure that this trend continues and increases by increasing our network's capacity to continue to access these resources by offering tools like this webinar for you all. So we're really glad that you're all here and hope that this helps with your work. Great. So now let's get going on the webinar. First, we're going to talk generally about various types of funding that are available to incentive programs. And while these programs are unique in many ways, they can also access the same types of program funding as other food systems, farmers market, community development organizations, and initiatives can. So this is a quick list of the various types of funding you can access for your incentive program. You have your obvious contenders here, like foundation grants, government, both state and federal grants, which we're going to talk about on this webinar for the most part. But you also have things like sponsorships from local businesses or larger corporations who are excited to fund anti-hunger work. You have things like volunteers, which would be considered a type of in-kind funding for reporting purposes, as they certainly have a financial value for your organization. So every volunteer is providing hours that you could be paying someone for. We're not going to talk as much about these various types of funding in this webinar, except mostly in terms of how they relate to raising the match for your federal grants, which will be the last portion of the webinar that we get to at the end. Great. So this is kind of an overview of the major government grants that are available. And I want to do a poll so we can find out if people have previously applied for federal grants before. So I'm going to launch this poll. It'll pop up on your screen, and you just select yes or no if you have previously applied for a federal grant. So we're at 64%, 68%. The faster people vote, the quicker we can get through this. Folks can just click yes or no. I'll give you a couple more seconds to do that. So it looks like we've got 86% of our attendees have applied for federal grants before, and 14% have not. So that's great. That's really useful for us to know in terms of how we're talking about these different opportunities. And apparently that closes down my slideshow. And then we also want to know if people have previously been awarded federal grants. So this is a slightly different question, but I think also interesting for us to know how many people have been successful when they do attempt to get federal grants. So it looks like we're at about 80% yes, and 24%, 76% yes, 24% no. Okay, great. I'll give you another couple seconds to register your vote if you want, and we'll close that down. Okay, so let's get back to the slideshow. So here are some of the government grants that you will probably be taking advantage of. The Agricultural Marketing Service, these are different parts of USDA that offer different types of grant programs. So the Ag Marketing Service offers the Farmers Market Promotion Program. That's to increase consumption of local foods and develop new market opportunities for farmers by developing direct market opportunities. Then this is the Federal State Marketing Improvement Program, which is known as FSMIP, matching funds to state departments of agriculture, state ag experiment stations, and other appropriate state agencies to develop new markets and improve the efficiency and performance of the marketing system. You've got Local Food Promotion Program, which is more broadly focused on local food and not necessarily just farmers markets. And then you have NEFA, which is offering community food projects grants, which focus heavily on community-based participatory programs. Obviously FINI, which we're going to talk about a lot more. And then a newer program through FNS, which is the Farmers Market SNAP Support Grants. This 2015 was the first year for those, and that has a goal of increasing SNAP accessibility and participation at farmers markets and improving EBT services at farmers markets. So these are two links down at the bottom of the screen here, the Healthy Food Access Portal and then NSAC's Guide to Federal Funding for Local and Regional Food Systems. Both of these are great kind of overviews of what federal grant programs are available. And if you want to find out more about government grants, you can check the Federal Register. USDA's Know Your Farmer website is a great resource as well. And then the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition's blog often releases information about new funding opportunities as soon as they become available. So that's a really great way to find out more. You can obviously also find out from Wholesome Wave's National Nutrition Incentive Network via our listserv and newsletters, because we also do release information about funding opportunities. You also want to check in with your local and state government agencies to ensure that you're fully utilizing those resources as well, especially since your federal sources will require some form of match funding, and that match, as we'll discuss later, cannot come from other federal sources. So branching out as much as possible is really important. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the FINI grant program specifically, and I have another poll for everyone, just so we can find out how many people watched the most recent NEFA FINI webinar that provided an overview of the FINI grant program, so that we can get a sense of people's familiarity as it stands. Okay, so about 83% no, and about 14% yes. So that's good for us to know. So folks maybe not as familiar with this information. And I'm just going to give folks another couple seconds, and I'm going to close this poll out. Okay, so hopefully we'll be able to sort of summarize what was covered there. And this is the prospect that's coming up soonest, and it's the most directly applicable to our network members, which is why we're focusing on it, because it is specifically geared towards incentive programs. So we're going to go into depth on FINI in this first section, and we're going to talk more broadly about applying for federal grants, but we're going to keep bringing it back to FINI throughout the rest of the sections. I want to make it clear that what we're offering in this webinar is Wholesome Wave's experience and perspective as a successful applicant to the FINI program. So we're just going to share what's worked for us and what we've heard worked well for our partners throughout the network that were awarded. If you need any definitive guidance on anything related to applying for FINI in terms of USDA's policies and procedures, rules, compliance, and that kind of thing, we really recommend that you seek that guidance from NEFA directly. And we have provided links and all the contact information for NEFA throughout this webinar so that you can get that information directly from them. We want to just make sure that that's where you need to go for your nitty-gritty questions about things like allowable expenses or other key information. We don't have those specific answers for you. We're just offering up some sort of general advice that we think might be useful. Okay, so what is FINI? Folks are probably aware at this point, but this program, the Food Insecurity Nutrition Incentive Program, was a $100 million grant program started in the 2014 Farm Bill, and this is the second round of funding this year. And this application is due in December, which is in about 6 weeks. And eligible government agencies and nonprofit organizations can include a broad range of different types of groups. So emergency feeding organizations, economic development corporations, community-supported agriculture programs, buying clubs, state, local, or tribal agencies. But you will have to demonstrate that you are one of these types of organizations. There are 3 different types of FINI grants. The major differences are the funding level, the period of performance, your evaluation requirements, and the focus. So they're pretty different. In terms of evaluation, our pilot projects, which is the shorter, newer projects, require only a process evaluation. So you don't have to do outcomes evaluation, and you're gathering that information for yourself, and then you're going to have limited interaction with an independent evaluator. And we're going to talk more about evaluation a little bit later on. There is a focus on starting new, innovative projects. However, all of the language for all of the levels really wants to see innovation. So that's not necessarily exclusive to pilots. What is exclusive to pilots is that they're new, that you have not done this before. But they do want you to have experience in addressing food access issues broadly. And then, we have our mid-level projects, which are up to $500,000. The period of performance is much longer than the pilot projects. It's up to 4 years you can be engaging in this work. And there's a higher level of interaction with the independent evaluator, and it's for established projects. And then there's large-scale, statewide, or multi-state programs, and that's greater than $500,000, only up to 4 years, and then does require, in fact, an outcomes evaluation. So knowing this, I'm going to, again, launch another poll just to see which scale project you're considering applying for, because I think that's interesting information for us to know. It looks like mostly mid-scale and a little bit of pilot, so about 30% pilot programs and about 65% mid-scale. And I'll give folks another few seconds to fill that one out. Okay, great. And then 6% large scale. Interesting. Okay, great. Thank you. So to be a contender, for these grants. These are non-negotiable must-haves for any proposal, and you'll have to demonstrate how these will get met. Your project must have the support of the state SNAP agency, so you have to have that relationship and make sure that that's demonstrable. The whole point is to increase the purchase of fruits and vegetables by SNAP participants at the point of purchase. You will have to operate through an authorized SNAP retailer, meaning they have an FNS number. You have to agree to participate in the evaluation at whatever level is appropriate for your scale project. You have to make absolutely sure that people receiving incentives are treated no differently than non-incentive recipients. That's part of the SNAP program compliance. And you have to include effective, efficient, replicable redemption systems. There's been a lot of focus on the redemption system, so that's something we really want to make sure you're paying attention to. Your organization must have some experience doing this type of work with food insecurity or with SNAP, demonstrated competency in program implementation, again, the secured commitment from a SNAP agency, and a willingness to share program information. So that's just to be in the running. Those are the basic requirements. To be really competitive, and this grant is really competitive, and is going to be even more so this year than it was last year, you really want to try to hit all of these points. So maximizing the share of funds to incentives, and we'll talk about that a little bit further on. Testing innovations, improving redemption systems. If you don't know what a promise zone or a strike force area is, I've put links in here. These are geographic locations that have been specifically marked as priorities for the federal government, HUD and USDA specifically, for improvement along a wide spectrum of indicators of social and economic well-being. So you want to check those sites that we've linked to see if your geographic location is considered one of those areas. And again, show that you have experience doing this type of work, that you're bringing in the community in your program design. And if you're utilizing partnerships, one thing to know is that partners do not have to be eligible entities. So you can branch out into a broader range of partnerships as needed. So in terms of evaluation, FNS, the Food and Nutrition Service, is in charge of managing the evaluation for this project, and they're working with an independent evaluator called WESTAT to do so. This year's RFA has more information on what that actually entails, but all projects need to do a self-evaluation no matter what, and you can take advantage of technical assistance on this self-evaluation from WESTAT. You'll also need to cooperate with WESTAT on their program-wide evaluation. So this is, as we said, limited for pilot projects to process evaluation and then submitting some minimal data, but will be more involved for mid-scale and large-scale projects. You should look over the minimum core data set on page 23 to 24 of the RFA very carefully and think about how you will capture that information as you describe your evaluation plan in the narrative. The minimum data set will be collected quarterly for all sites participating in your project. So just be aware of that and think about what kind of administrative capacity you'll need to build in to make that work for your program. Some examples are site and project information and then incentive program information. So site and project information includes things like the locations, the retail locations, the financial instrument used for SNAP and incentive purchases, so if it's tokens or script, months of operation, operating days and hours. This is just a small selection from a very long list, so really go through that in detail. And then in terms of your incentive program information, number of SNAP participants per site per year, average incentive value redeemed per recipient, triggers for earning the incentive, so is it purchasing fruits and vegetables or specified fruits and vegetables, incentive levels, and like I said, it's a really long list, so definitely look through that. Here are some things your project will have to comply with in terms of FNS and SNAP rules. So each retail location must have their own device and FNS number. This project is designed to work with SNAP authorized retailers only. You need to be able to return refunds to people's EBT cards. You cannot give cash refunds on any funds distributed. Obviously equal treatment, which we've talked about before, which is making sure that anybody who's receiving incentives through this program is treated the same as all the other customers at your market. Data sharing, you need to make sure that everything's confidential and that you're not sharing any information about program participants that would break that confidentiality rule. Your reporting, they're very concerned with reporting and reporting to Westat, so making sure that the timeline, incentive information, retailer information is all there and updated regularly. They're concerned about feasibility of the project around this timeline and incentive information as well, so that's how they're understanding that. And again, this evaluation is being managed by FNS, and they're contracting with Westat as the independent evaluator. So there are a lot of components to the application. It's a large federal grant, so there's lots of pieces. And there's your cover sheet, your site locations, abstract, that sort of thing. The narrative is what people tend to focus on the most. And it's limited to 10 pages, except that doesn't include the 5 pages that are available for tables and graphics, which also includes your project plan. So your project plan is actually required as part of that, and that is 3 pages. So you actually have 2 other pages for tables and graphics. And then your appendices can be up to 7 pages, and so that doesn't include what's included in the narrative. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the narrative later on in terms of best practices, but your community and needs need to be really clearly defined, who you're serving and who's doing the work, like which partner organizations you're working with. The goals and outcomes for your program, obviously key. Activities are how you're going to meet those goals and outcomes. You want to make sure it's very clear what the relationship is to the FINI objectives as stated in the RFA. How you're going to do the evaluation is really important, and you really want to think that through, as I said before, looking through the minimum core data set. What are the mechanisms and tools and the time you're going to be able to allocate to that. Your program and incentive information, again, is a lot of that minimum core data set that Westat is asking for. The sustainability of your project is about how you're going to continue to operate this project past the point of funding through the FINI program. So do you have other community sources of funding that can carry the program forward? Non-supplantation is about making sure that you're not using this funding to replace any other funding that you would be receiving to do the work anyway. So Sharon might talk a little bit more about that when we get further on in terms of like best practices for budgets and that kind of thing. And then again, your tables and graphics and your project plan. So it's a lot. And that's just the narrative. So beyond the narrative, again, here are these other components of the application, and you have your attachments, which include letters of support, your match documentation, any appendices have to be less than 7 pages, a logic model, and then if you need a fiscal agent letter, if you have a fiscal sponsor that you're working with, not everybody needs that. So it's really important to start working on these pieces well in advance of the application deadline. We're about 6 weeks out now, so you need to keep all of it in mind and not just be thinking about the narrative, but go into more depth with the whole proposal. Specifically, the cover sheet is a doozy. It does end up being about a 15-page PDF, and people should start working on that at least a week early. Don't start doing it the morning of. There's a lot of attachments. You will only find this information in the NEFA guide to the cover sheet, which we, or NEFA guide to the grant, which we have a link to that in the presentation coming up a little bit later. But definitely start it while you're still doing the narrative. And then evaluation criteria, this is what your proposal is going to be graded on, so make sure you're just paying close attention to these points and how you're meeting them in your narrative, your budgets, your project plans, and how you're bringing in partners, which hopefully you've already built a lot of those relationships, but obviously advancing the primary goal of FINI, aligning with FINI priorities, relevance of experience to the strength of your evaluation plan, sustainability, but this is in order of their preference and how they're grading proposals. So the most important being advance the primary goal of FINI, least important being a realistic timeline and budget. Just a few special considerations, a couple final points to mention. No more than 50% of your award can be subcontracted without permission from USDA. you can ask for permission from USDA. It's not hard, and they have given it in the past. It's not a particularly onerous thing to ask permission for. In the context of incentives, it makes a lot of sense because you may be passing through funds to actually distribute those incentives. So it's absolutely fine to reach out to NEFA about that, and the contact information is included later. One application per team. Your funding period is limited to 4 years or one for pilots. And then funds may not be used to promote SNAP benefits or enrollment. So that's the language about that is on page 29. Just keep that in mind as you're constructing your narrative. This is about the non-supplantation, which is there's already a program that exists. It's called the SNAP Ed program that does SNAP promotion, and that's not what FINI is designed to do. So just make sure that you're being thoughtful about how you're discussing that. And then really quickly, just some changes in year 1 versus year 2. USDA really wants to focus on the diversity of participants and proposals and bringing in the connections between consumers and producers and local communities. And that just seems to have more emphasis in this year's RFA. So there's more of a food systems approach to projects, which we think is a really heartening direction. I think is really great. Just keep in mind there's only 50% of the funding in year 2 that was available in year 1. So you have 16 million this year versus 32 million last year. So in terms of competition for the grant, just know that that's what you're working towards, or the limitation that we have. And then there's increased program awareness, obviously. You can give away eligible fruits and vegetables as well as nutrition education. And if you are going to be giving any non-financial incentives away, there'll be some additional scrutiny around that. So that's that for the FINI overview. And now I'm going to hand it over to our program associate, Elizabeth Atwell. She's going to talk about how to sort of logistically get this type of grant application together and some key practices for just getting a really stellar proposal off the ground. Elizabeth, you can go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Ava. So as Ava has been going over in some detail, these grants of this size have a lot of components. Therefore, it is absolutely essential that you clearly plan out when each piece of the grant will be completed and assign responsibility for completing each deliverable. A good place to start is by creating a detailed timeline for when tasks are to be completed. End it with the grant deadline and work backwards. Be sure to budget in time to have your application reviewed by third-party reviewers and to incorporate their feedback before you submit the final product. When developing your work plan, be sure that you do not put off registering with grants.gov. This is a multi-step process that includes first registering for a DUNS and SAM account, if you don't already have one. That entire process can take up to 2 weeks. Let's do a quick poll to see who in the room has already gone through the process of registering with grants.gov. If there are several who have not, then we can go into more detail, but if most of you are familiar with the process, we will just move right along. So we're still waiting on a few responses. We'll give it a few more seconds, but it looks like about 71% have, about 29% are saying no. So since it looks like a majority of you are familiar with this process, we're not going to go into too much greater detail, but we have provided the links to the information on registering with grants.gov, registering with SAM and DUNS at the end of this. Okay, well, with getting a few more last votes, it looks like there are enough to go into a little more detail, so I will quickly go over that. So first of all, DUNS stands for Data Universal Number System, and it's the first step for registering your organization with grants.gov. A DUNS ID is a unique 9-digit number used to identify your organization that allows the government to track how federal money is allocated. You need to allow up to 2 days to obtain a DUNS ID. Once you have obtained this number, you're ready to register with the System for Awards Management, typically referred to as SAM. To register with SAM, you will need to have your DUNS ID and your Employment Identification Number, EIN. If you don't already have an EIN, you will need to allow an additional 2 weeks to obtain this number from the IRS. Registering with SAM can take 7 or even 10 business days. Once you have obtained your DUNS and SAM number, you're ready to create a grants.gov account, and that usually can happen in the same day. Additional information on where to register for grants.gov, DUNS, and SAM will be provided at the end of this webinar. Once you have registered with grants.gov and made your timeline, you can start assigning tasks. Applying for grants of this size is typically a team effort, and all good teams need a captain. Assigning a point person for your grant proposal is a key to ensuring that everyone is completing their deliverables. If you have the capacity, it is best to have your grant captain not be your content expert. It can be overwhelming if this is the same person. Your grant captain should act as the manager, keeping everyone on track. After strategizing how to write your application, it's time to start strategizing your content. One of the best ways to do this is in a logic model. A logic model is a conceptual tool for planning and evaluating a program that displays the sequence of actions of your proposal and their resulting outcomes. A logic model clarifies the connection between funding investments and program activities, and between outputs and projected outcomes. It provides the fundamental framework of your proposal and allows reviewers to test whether the program makes sense. A good logic model can be the roadmap that guides grant reviewers through the many pages of your narrative. And if you find yourself getting bogged down in the trenches of writing your narrative, use this as a map and your guide. For a more detailed guide to writing logic models, as well as a template, visit the nifa.usda.gov page on logic model planning process. Once you've made your logic model, you're ready to start planning your narrative. There are already countless resources on writing successful grant proposals, many of which are focused on writing USDA grants. These can be invaluable tools, especially for those less experienced grant writers. We will provide a list of USDA and NIFA resources at the end of this webinar. Use them. In addition, a comprehensive list of previously funded projects of recent USDA grants is available on the NIFA website. Contacting previously funded projects and asking them to share insights into their process, their proposal, and why they think their application was successful can be a really great way to get ideas on how you should set up and craft your own application. When writing your narrative, it is important that you consider your audience as well. USDA grant reviewers can be a really mixed bag, ranging from experts in the field to people who have little context into what you're writing about. Use language that assumes that your reviewer is not familiar with your program. A good way to keep yourself on track in terms of language is to ask a friend or colleague who has little knowledge of your work to read over the narrative and provide feedback on clarity. You can't count that your grant reviewers will know the background on your work, but you can count on the fact that they are reviewing a huge volume of competitive grant proposals. So how do you make your application stand out? Successful proposals present an innovative and exciting concept. As Ava mentioned, recently NIFA has been particularly focused on the development of efficient and effective technologies that improve benefit redemption systems. A great proposal has a narrative that is logical, well-written, and easy to understand. They create programs that can be sustained beyond the grant period and replicated in other areas. And they have well-developed methods for evaluation and dissemination of results. So when you go to write your narrative, keep in mind the following tips. First of all, more is less. Grant reviewers usually have stacks of proposals, so they learn quickly to scan applications for key content, the who, what, why, and how of your application. Be short and to the point, and that is much better than being verbose. If you bog down your reviewer with too much detail, they will likely have a hard time understanding your proposal, and that is a sure way to get your application thrown into the no pile. Try to stay away from acronyms, technical jargon, absolute terms such as never and always, generalizations. Also avoid political opinions and statements that are overly bold or negative. One of the most important tips of grant writing is to use the same terms in your proposal as in the RFA. Buzz phrases taken directly from the RFA guidelines catch the eye of the reviewer, cluing them into the fact that you are addressing the necessary components of the grant. Finally, it is critical to use language that is specific and describes exactly what actions, outcomes, and impact your program will achieve. Note the differences in the examples below. You should describe with elegant simplicity exactly what you plan to do with your requested funds. As you write your application, check in with yourself to make sure that the purpose, approach, and impact of your program is clearly defined and that there is a clear thread that connects them all. The parts of the FINI RFA narrative portion that deal with purpose includes sections A, the community involved with the project and the needs to be addressed, and E, relationships with program objectives, which means how your projected outcomes relate to the objectives of the FINI grant program. The pieces of the FINI narrative that deal with approach are sections B, the organizations and communities involved in the project, C, project's goals and intended outcomes, and D, activities to achieve the goals. Finally, the pieces in the FINI narrative that deal with impacts are those on evaluation and sustainability. As you revise your narrative, use the questions on this slide to make sure that you are staying on track and addressing all the necessary components of an outstanding application. For this next slide, I'm going to turn things over to our Senior Development Manager, Sharon Hammetz.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So when you're developing your budget, just a couple of tips for that. I assume that everybody has developed a budget before, but developing a budget for FINI and a USDA grant is a different animal. So looking at FINI, you want to always maximize the percentage of USDA funds that are going to direct incentives. Also, if you have staff on this project, you want to make sure that your percentages of the staff time are reasonable and can be backed up. Also, for anything else, any of your other direct program costs, use math. Do not estimate. Show where your numbers came from. USDA is not going to like your estimates and they might disallow them. Everything in your budget does need to be justified, first of all, in your budget narrative, and secondly, you shouldn't have anything in your budget that hasn't, the need for which hasn't already been discussed in your program narrative. So you can't start introducing new expenses that may be really important to your program, but haven't been justified in the program narrative and just seem to be coming out of nowhere. Keep in mind that up to 10% of the project budget can go to evaluation, and that you can also include indirect, or as they're also called, administrative costs. Those include anything you need to back up the project that's not a project expense. Rent, your finance department, anything like that. So there are two ways of looking at your indirect costs. The first is getting what is called a NICRA from the federal government. That is a negotiated indirect cost recovery agreement. You have to get a NICRA, you have to fill out a pretty long form and get USDA to sort of approve of all the expenses you have under your administrative costs. It's a long process. People don't really like to go through it. So the other way that you can get some of your administrative costs back is to get what's called a 10% de minimis rate, which is where USDA will allow you to put into your budget 10% of all allowable costs as your indirect cost recovery. All allowable costs, you can look at the RFA for the whole list of them. Essentially, they include all of your direct program costs except for anything that you are passing through to somebody else. I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth now.
Great, Sharon, thanks. So now that we've discussed budget and narrative, another key component to your USDA grants are your partnerships and your letters of support. Letters of support that demonstrate meaningful strategic partnerships really can strengthen your grant proposal. In addition to partnering with your SNAP agency, think beyond just those organizations that are directly involved with your project. Considering inviting your ag agency or commissioner, your congressional delegation or community foundations, and any other important community or state partnerships. Remember when requesting letters of support that groups might want to see your narrative before signing on, so give yourself plenty of lead time to ask for these letters and to receive them back. Finally, before submitting your application, do be sure to have it reviewed for grammatical accuracy and clarity. After all the hard work that you've put into any USDA application, the last thing that you want is to be disqualified at the 11th hour due to a technical error. So plan on submitting your application at least 2 to 3 days prior to the grant deadline. Submitting early allows you time to address any snafus that might arise with your submission. Grants.gov will email applicants providing the submission receipt number, submission validation receipt, and grantor agency retrieval notification. NIFA also sends confirmation of grant application. Be sure to document and save all of this information, and if you do not receive a confirmation of your submission, contact grants.gov immediately. Once you have confirmed successful receipt of your application, be sure to celebrate. And keep in mind that even if you do not receive funding, the process of writing the application and the written feedback that will be provided by reviewers is incredibly valuable and can be put towards future grant applications.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We wanted to make sure that all of these important links were all in one place for you so they'd be easy to find. So this and the following slide are all available here and again at the end of the presentation. So if you do go download the slides from our website, when it becomes available, you'll be able to view them and then just click the links to get to these grants.gov resources and USDA resources. I know we're running a little bit behind and we're coming up to the section on raising the match. So we're going to hear again from Sharon Hammett, who's our Senior Development Manager, about best practices and considerations for that. Again, applicable to FINI, but also to any federal grant that you choose to apply for. But because we're running a little bit behind and I want to make sure she gets all of her content in, we're also answering questions in the question box. So you can keep those questions coming and then we'll turn those into a FAQ that we'll include in the slideshow that we make available for download. So everybody might, but if you want to see the answers to those questions, you can check in that box right now. And then if we do have time, we'll answer a few of them, but we might just be able to answer them in the box. So Sharon, why don't you go ahead and take it away? Thank you.
Thank you, Ava. Sorry. So, as Ava said, my name is Sharon Hammett. I am the Senior Development Manager at Wholesome Wave. I was responsible for bringing in most of the match for Wholesome Wave's FINI proposal in 2014. So, in the process, I definitely confirmed that A, this is not always a straightforward process, and B, the rules are not completely transparent. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to do my best to demystify the process. So first, what is the match? The very, very simple definition is any money that you're spending to execute your program that did not come from the federal funder, in this case, FINI. So what does this mean? It means that, you know, when you're running your program, you are spending money on salaries and incentives and everything else you spend money on to get the program to work. You are spending FINI dollars, and then you are spending an equal amount of non-FINI dollars. For example, you have a coordinator overseeing your incentive program. You're paying this person 50% of their salary charged to FINI, and 50% of their salary is charged to another source of income. That other 50% is your match. So the money can be contributed by your organization or by another funder. It can be cash or in kind. Very important, it cannot include any other federal funds, including USDA funds like Specialty Crop Block Grant, Farmers Market Prevention Program, Community Food Projects, or another federal agency like Health and Human Services, Treasury, all of those. The other thing is that all of your match has to be used for FINI program activities only, and that includes funding for what you might think of as complementary activities does not count. A good example is that if you have funding for a program that incentivizes WIC benefits, that funding is not applicable to your FINI match because FINI only funds SNAP incentives. Also, to get a little muddier, you do get into a complicated area with some shared expenses and supplies that are shared across your programs, like market tents or chairs or things like that. If these supplies are used for your general program, they do not count for FINI match. It is possible to figure out how to divide these costs among all of your program components and apply a portion of them to your FINI match, but figuring that out is going to involve lots of math and spreadsheets and guesswork, and I don't recommend doing it unless you have a degree in accounting. That said, if you really want to count these costs, you need to come up with because the last thing you want is to include costs in your final proposal that are then disallowed. Okay, so I was told my sound cut off, so discuss your allocation method with USDA because you don't want to have costs in your final proposal that are disallowed. Next slide. So now that we know what the match is, how do we raise it? The FINI RFP stipulates that you have to have the entire match raised before they will approve your project. So what exactly does this mean? Well, in the ideal world, you have all of the cash you need in the bank at the beginning of your project, or a funder has committed to providing the entire amount, stipulating that it be used only for FINI project activities, and everything is set, and you know exactly where that money is coming from and how it's going to be spent. In reality, this is not easy to achieve, especially for multi-year projects. At the bare minimum, what you can do is just show your match-related expenses in your overall budget. So in other words, you have your full budget and it's split into expenses that you're charging to FINI and expenses that you're charging to an alternative funder, and that is what you submit as your budget document to USDA. Once you have the grant, if you then submit the project and get the grant, once you have it, your financial reporting to USDA is going to need to show expense that you spent money that you're counting toward the match, but they don't ask where the money came from. So I always make a joke that in theory you could go across the street, rob a bank, and use that money for FINI activities, and you will remain in compliance with your match requirement. I don't recommend this because there are other issues, clearly. So one last note, while you don't have to show where the money came from for your match, you absolutely have to have receipts on file that can prove that you spent your match. And you could be audited for this money, and if USDA does audit your grant, they're going to want to see those receipts. Okay, so if you're going to use, so this is starting to sound really easy. All you have to do is show where the expenses are going to come from. Be careful, because if you choose to take this approach, you might just be showing things on paper now, but you are still committing your organization to these future expenses, and you are going to have to raise this money if you get a FINI grant. Essentially, what you've done is committed your organization's general operating or unrestricted funds to support your FINI project if you can't raise the match in any other way. So all you've done really is buy time to raise it. That may be time you need. This may be a perfectly good strategy for showing your match or for raising your match. But understand the commitment you're making. Probably a prudent strategy would be to have raised at least a portion of the match indicated in your proposal by the time you submit it, and to have a plan for raising the rest of it. So, since you do have to raise it, where can you raise it from? Okay, so the first more traditional way of raising your match is foundation grants. These are useful but not a panacea. They have a long lead time, so if you know you need $10,000 next week, you're probably not getting it from a foundation unless you have a really good relationship. Solution. Foundations are usually going to fund a project for 1, 2, or 3 years, and you're going to have to keep applying for that money every year. Sources could, but it is a really good way of funding yourself for a couple of years. If you are looking specifically for foundation funders, sources could include community foundations and other foundations focusing specifically on your community or geographical region. Next one is corporate sponsorships. These for the community-based incentive programs, these are usually going to come from locally based businesses and local outlets of some chain stores. Some drug stores give out money this way, and a couple of other larger chains. Corporate sponsorships and business money is usually not strictly philanthropic. You're going to need to provide some benefit to the business you're working with, such as publicity for supporting your project, or a place for them to place volunteers. Each corporation or company is going to be different, and you're going to have to work out the terms with each company that supports you. To identify potential sources, you should probably think about local businesses focused on products that are identified with something that's identified with your program: health, food, wellness, agriculture, as just examples. So, what about government funding? As we said, federal funding does not count toward the match, but grants from state or local governments are a really good choice. They can include, your state, your city, your town, your county, whatever's out there in your part of the country. Some state and municipal governments have written funding for nutrition incentives right into their budgets. Washington, D.C. has done this. But it's not going to be quite that easy in most cities. You need to check with your local government to see if there are any funding programs that could support your incentive program. And keep in mind that it's not necessarily going to be money provided for incentive programs. It could be money for health or economic development. You can figure out those connections, and once you do, there's probably a rich array of funding opportunities within your local government that you can apply for. You can also try to lobby for nutrition incentive money to be written into your local budgets, but clearly this is going to be a long-term process and is not something you can plan on for your next season. Okay. Other sources of match, earned income can go towards your match from activities like fees on credit card purchases or vendors, sales of a particular item, event fees. You can get creative here. There's a lot of different ways of just raising that money. Use your imagination. Oh, sorry. Ava says you didn't hear me there. So there are a lot of different ways that you can raise your money through so-called market-based approaches. Use your imagination a little bit, and there are as many ways to do this as we have partners out there. And then last but certainly not least, and very important, you can make part of your match through in-kind donations. Those include services or materials that directly benefit your project but are not paid for out of any organizational funds, including FINI or matching cash. You can count salaries for people who are working directly with the program but are being paid through general operating funds, volunteer labor, donated supplies, anything that goes specifically toward FINI activities. Again, all of your in-kind donations also have to be used exclusively for your incentive program. So the list of possibilities goes on, and I will reiterate, if you're not sure something counts, or if you're not sure how to do something with your match, you need to check with USDA and see if they'll allow something. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was amazing and much appreciated. So it looks like we've been able to answer a lot of the questions in the question box. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do those live, but you did get them answered that way. And then, like I said, we'll be able to put all of those in a slide and include it in the slideshow when we put that up on our website. And again, we have these important resources, so our links pages for NEFA websites and USDA websites, grants.gov, resources that you can call so you can get assistance with that. And then just really quickly before everyone signs out, oh geez, that's not what I wanted to do. I clicked on the link. Really quickly before everyone signs out, I just want to make sure that you know, again, that the resources will be available online on our resource library. We do have some upcoming events. We'll be doing webinars throughout the off-season, topical based on your feedback and interest. So you can tell us what you want to see in the evaluation form that you'll be receiving in a follow-up email. Please do fill that out. You can always send listserv messages and questions about this, start conversations about your funding strategies on that listserv. Monthly newsletters go out from NIN. Again, we have the resource library. And then we're very much hoping you'll all join us for the Transforming Food Access Summit, which is January 11th through the 13th in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a great place for market managers and people working on incentive programs to come together, share resources, best practices. We have amazing sessions lined up with lots of phenomenal presenters from all over the food system sector. So we really hope that you'll come and join us for that. Thank you all again so much for being part of this network and for attending the webinar. And do feel free to get in touch with me or Elizabeth with questions that you didn't get to ask. And please, again, don't forget to fill out your evaluations after the webinar. Thank you.